Daniel chapter 3. Daniel chapter 3, verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof of 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar erects an image and demands all worship it. The image is erected. There is considerable debate regarding when this happened. Some think it was a short time after chapter 2. Others think it was many years. The image was more like a stylized obelisk than a normal statue, 90 feet high, 9 feet wide. And it was not pure gold, but probably wood overlaid with gold, a customary method of construction in Old Testament times. There is a discernible link between chapters 2 and 3. We see Nebuchadnezzar's attempt to be the entire statue and to defeat God's declared plan. On the plains of Dura there stands today a rectilinear mound about 20 feet high, an exact square of about 46 feet at the base, resembling the pedestal of a colossal statue. Daniel chapter 3, verse 2. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the princes, the governors, and the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces, to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Daniel chapter 3, verse 3. Then the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. All of Babylonia's dignitaries are gathered at the dedication ceremony of the image. Satrap is a Persian loanword which means protector of the realm. It refers to a specific category of public officials. Nebuchadnezzar's motive was to use the worship of this image as a unifying pledge of allegiance to his god, Nebo, and thus to him and his state. Politicians have always wanted to use some type, any type, of religion to strengthen their grip on the people. In 1960, the president of Ghana had a slightly larger than life-size statue of himself erected in front of the Nation House of Parliament. An inscription on the side of the statue read, "Seek ye first the political kingdom, and all other kingdoms shall be added unto you." The statue was destroyed after a bloodless coup in 1966. In 1936, Herr Baldur von Schirach, head of the youth program in Nazi Germany, said, "If we act as true Germans, we act according to the laws of God. Whoever serves Adolf Hitler, the Führer, serves Germany, and whoever serves Germany serves God." Daniel chapter 3, verse 4. Then an herald cried out, "To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages." Daniel chapter 3, verse 5. That at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king hath set up. Daniel chapter 3, verse 6. And whoso falleth not down and worshippeth shall that hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. The command to worship the image. Some of the musical instruments are difficult to define precisely, but the idea is clear. Some have objected to Daniel's authorship of the book because he uses Aramaic words that were borrowed from Greek, lyre, psaltery, and symphony, in chapter 3, verses 5, 7, 10, and 15. Supposedly, Daniel would not have had these Aramaic Greek words at his disposal in the 6th century BC, and they would not have come into the Hebrew vocabulary until the 3rd century BC. Ancient records tell us that there were Greeks in the region of Assyria, Babylon, and Persia as far back as the 8th century BC. As well, archaeology proves beyond a doubt that Greek mercenaries were fighting and making military settlements in and around Judea previous to the time of Daniel. The command is empowered by a naked threat. Refusal would be interpreted as high treason. Nebuchadnezzar was not a man to allow a lawbreaker to go unpunished. In a cuneiform writing, Nebuchadnezzar is described as so devoted to justice that he did not rest day or night. This document also tells of a criminal guilty of a second offense who was decapitated, and a stone image of his head was displayed as a warning. Daniel chapter 3, verse 7. Therefore, at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations, and the languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. The crowd reacts to the command. Literally, verse 7 reads, "As soon as they were hearing, they were falling down." There was total and immediate obedience to Nebuchadnezzar's command. Daniel chapter 3, verse 8. Wherefore at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. Daniel chapter 3, verse 9. They spake and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Daniel chapter 3, verse 10. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the golden image. Daniel chapter 3, verse 11. And whoso falleth not down and worshippeth, that he should be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. Daniel chapter 3, verse 12. There are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. 3 Hebrew men refused the demand. The accusation of the Chaldeans against the 3 Hebrew men. Obviously, the Chaldeans had a political motivation against these Jews who had been promoted to high office along with Daniel in chapter 2. Daniel chapter 3, verse 13. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Daniel chapter 3, verse 14. Nebuchadnezzar spoke and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Daniel chapter 3, verse 15. Now if ye be ready, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the image which I have made. But if ye worship not, ye shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God who shall deliver you out of my hands? Nebuchadnezzar interviews the disobedient Hebrew men. To his credit, Nebuchadnezzar will not accept the accusation against these men on hearsay. He wants to make sure of it. But there was no way that Nebuchadnezzar was going to lose face at such an important occasion. So his pride made him declare, You shall have no other gods than me. Nebuchadnezzar thinks nothing of insulting all gods. Who is the God who shall deliver you from my hands? He is more of a secularist or a humanist than a theist. The God he really believes in is himself, not the gods of Babylon. Daniel chapter 3, verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. Daniel chapter 3, verse 17. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. Daniel chapter 3, verse 18. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up." The three Hebrew men insist they will never worship the image, no matter what the consequences. They have no need to defend themselves. Their guilt in this matter is clear. They clearly will not bow down to this image. They have a clear grasp of God's omnipotence. Our God, whom we serve, is able. And His sovereignty. He will deliver us. But if not, they show both faith and submission. Often Christians whine too much about their rights and what is fair. It is sometimes preferable to make a stand and take your lumps, leaving your fate in God's hands. They would not presume to doubt God's ability, but neither would they presume to know God's will. With Job, they would say, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." Job chapter 13, verse 15. These men recognized that God's will might be different than their desires. I have my own desires and dreams, and I pray that God fulfills them, but if He doesn't, I can't turn my back on Him. They had great faith to be able to say this, and God used the smaller things of obedience to prepare them for the big things. These men stood firm when challenged to eat food that was polluting, according to their law, and they saw God bless their obedience. That gave them the courage to obey now, when the stakes were much higher. Are you waiting for something big before you really start to obey God? Is your life filled with 100 little compromises? Daniel chapter 3, verse 19. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake, and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. Daniel chapter 3, verse 20. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in the army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Daniel chapter 3, verse 21. Then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, and their hats, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Daniel chapter 3, verse 22. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent, and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Daniel chapter 3, verse 23. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound down into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. The Hebrew men in the fiery furnace. They are cast violently into the furnace. Everything is done to make sure they are quickly and completely burned. Daniel chapter 3, verse 24. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished, and rose up in haste, and spake and said unto his counselors, Did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. Daniel chapter 3, verse 25. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Nebuchadnezzar sees them, along with another person, alive and well in the furnace. Nebuchadnezzar tells us who the 4th person was with them, the Son of God. Jesus was literally with them in the worst of their trial. Nebuchadnezzar also noted that they were loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and all the fire of suffering burnt was their bonds. Daniel chapter 3, verse 26. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fiery furnace, and spake, and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire. Daniel chapter 3, verse 27. And the princes, governors, and captains, and the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men, upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was an hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. The Hebrew men leave the furnace and are found to be unharmed. The fact that they did not even have the smell of fire on them shows what a miracle this was. The fourth man, Jesus, never came out of the furnace with the three. I wonder if the three Hebrews knew he was there all the time. Sometimes Jesus' presence with us during trial is very real, but quite invisible. Daniel chapter 3, verse 28. Then Nebuchadnezzar spoke and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who hath sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word and yielded their bodies, that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Aftermath? Nebuchadnezzar acknowledges the greatness of the God of the three Hebrews. But notice, he is clearly their God, not his. Jesus means little to us until we can say with Thomas, My Lord and my God. John 20:28. The miraculous work right in front of his eyes impressed him, but his heart was still not changed. Daniel chapter 3, verse 29. Therefore I make a decree, that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. Nebuchadnezzar makes a proclamation that nothing evil shall be said against the God of the Hebrews. This also is Nebuchadnezzar's recognition of God's effective rebuke. God's image with only a head of gold is the true one. Nebuchadnezzar's self-glorifying image, entirely made of gold, isn't valid. Daniel chapter 3, verse 30. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. The three Hebrew men are promoted. Observations? We can suggest Nebuchadnezzar is a type of the Antichrist, who forces the whole world into one religion of idolatrous worship. Revelation 13 also describes an image which the Antichrist will demand the world worship. The fiery furnace is a type of the tribulation, which will be great affliction to the Jews. The tribulation is also called the time of Jacob's trouble, Jeremiah 30, verse 7. The Hebrew men are a type of Israel, who will be preserved through the tribulation. The executioners who perished are a type of those in league with the Antichrist, who Jesus will slay at his return. Where was Daniel? Perhaps ill, perhaps away on state business, but his absence is significant. Why would a pseudo-Daniel leave him out? Nebuchadnezzar may have been prevented from such a foolish thing if Daniel were present. His absence completes an interesting type. Daniel is a type of the church who isn't even present. One last type. Nebuchadnezzar as a type of Satan, trying to force believers to bow down to his own image of what men and women should be instead of God's image.